actually look like
So this spot right here has a ton of soda straws. While we're waiting for everyone else, feel free to hold a light up and see if you can look into one of those straws. Yeah, there's one good one in the center of that pile.
Oh, me too.
All right, folks, so right now we are standing just in front of a wall that has a lot of little soda straws. One thing I didn't mention is exactly how this calcite or these formations get into the cave. So I want to quickly go over that. If we go back up to the surface level and you have rain falling from the sky, and sitting on the ground, eventually that water is going to get absorbed into the soil and it's going to start going into the ground itself. As water does that, it passes by plants in the soil and picks up carbon dioxide. Water and carbon dioxide react to form a weak acid known as carbonic acid. That carbonic acid makes its way through our rock very slowly. And as that carbonic acid goes through the rock, it actually dissolves the rock, causing for all the calcite within our dolomite rock to go into the water. That calcium-rich carbonic acid then comes into the cave, and once the water makes it into the cave, it degasses, loses the carbon dioxide, and at that point, it's going to leave behind calcite in all the different formations we're seeing. One of the most common cave formations is going to be your soda straw. Soda straws are simply those hollow tubes or water's moving through. As that water degasses, it leaves behind another thin layer of calcite on the tip of your straw before it drips down to the ground. But sometimes a soda straw can get clogged. Every once in a while, something gets caught in that pore or that hole. Maybe a piece of sediment or a small pebble that didn't fully get dissolved. And when that happens, our straw gets clogged, just like you're drinking a milkshake, right? And you get one of those cookie dough chunks caught in it and you can't drink it anymore. You have to clear out the straw. We don't get to clear out the straw though. So what happens is water stops going through the center and it starts to go around the outsides of the straw, and that straw will turn into stalactite. If you look at a lot of the formations next to the straws, you'll notice a ton of stalactites developing. That's after your soda straw gets clogged. It can become a stalactite. That's how many of these start to form. And then over time, of course, you still get your stalagmites, your columns, your flowstone. And sometimes you get flowstone that's really tall and colorful, like we're seeing here. And then other times you'll get formations that instead of being shiny, when they're shiny, they're wet, they're still actively developing, but they can dry out. That's just because water has stopped coming down to that space. However, if water did go over that space again, and maybe 100 years from now, it would continue to develop, unless it's been touched. This stalagmite here, sitting out in the open, was one that was touched a long time ago for decades, in about the 1930s into the 70s. That was when this cave was a commercial-run cave. So things were a little different, and they actually allowed people to touch this formation. I'm not touching it, but I am acting like it, just want to point that out. And when you touch it, the oil in our hands goes onto that formation. And oil and water do not mix, right? Oil repels water. So then after this has got decades worth of oil on it, our water can drip down, but it's just going to pop off and go to the ground instead, or start making a new formation next to it. But that formation itself will never clean off the oil. It will never develop again after decades worth of people touching it. And that's why inside the cave we don't touch our formations today. We don't want the deterioration of our formations. Instead, we want them to continue to develop and get bigger and heavier over time. Any questions about any of that info before we keep moving? Miss Abby. Has anyone touched it? No one has touched this formation in about 50 years. But for 50 years before that, people touched it every day. So we are not going to touch it anymore because we have learned from those people. And we want to act better than they used to. Just like people will learn from us one day and act better than we did. So we will not touch it today, but it used to be touched. That's a good question, Miss Addie. All right. As we keep going, I want you all to start looking for signs of life inside the cave. So be careful, try not to step on anything if you don't see anything, but keep looking around you. See if you can find. We'll be down behind.
Oh, wait. Hey, little Joe.
Mm-hmm. Probably. It's probably spring water, truth be told.
Don't touch that one. Look at it.
Kind of looks like a rat face.
Look at this one.
Oh, I didn't say what it was. I was asking what it is, or what you thought it was. It's actually some soil I brought in this morning. I'm working on growing plants. I'm kidding, I'm not doing that. That's not something I did. All right, my friends, if you look just in front of you, you notice a big dark pile of what?
Poop.
That poop. Oh my
This
Or
is a big
feces.
pile of poop that is taller than I am. And this is guano, more bat poop.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Now the fun thing about this is I told you earlier that guano feeds a lot of our ecosystems, right? Usually with guano you'd have insects coming up and you might have some mold and some fungi growing out of it. Do you see any of that here?
No.
No. Did I lie to you? This is a trick question. You can answer however you would like. I didn't lie to you.
Is it too fresh?
This is too old of poop.
That's good.
We've actually been able to date how old this poop is, which sounds very odd, but it is something we've been tasked with doing. And we do that by figuring out how much pollen is inside the poop, and then you can date the pollen itself. Well, from taking a sample of the poop going as deep as we can, we figured out that this guano is about 7,000 years old. It's a very old pile of poop. More than likely, just above this pile, we had a maternity colony of gray bats. Gray bats, whenever they are nursing young, tend to stay in very large groups of hundreds to maybe even thousands of bats. Historically, gray bats have utilized this cave. Today, they don't a whole lot. This pile, though, has been left from at least one nursing colony, but potentially multiple. You'll actually see more piles just like this one inside the cave, most of them also old. Our gray bats today do not utilize this cave. We don't know if that is primarily due to white nose syndrome, which you might have heard of if you've been into other caves, or if that's simply because there was a change in the cave ecosystem. Gray bats are very picky about where they choose to raise their young. And sometimes one little change in the cave, like a new species utilizing it or a different bat population coming in, will cause for them to leave. But the gray bats today are in a big decline in this area due to white nose syndrome. That is a fungal disease that develops on the bats when they hibernate inside the cave. When they hibernate, they lower their body temperature to match the cave, 57 degrees, and that fungus survives in the dark, damp, cool conditions the cave offers. It only develops on bats. They're the only known host. But when the bats lower their temperature, they're now the perfect host, and it develops on their nose, hence white nose, but also on any exposed skin, such as their wings. That's going to increase their body temperature as their immune system is now working harder, and they go through those fat reserves that they built up for the winter. So the bat wakes up in the winter and is hungry. But what's not there anymore? It's food source. It's in the winter time, there are no insects for those bats to eat. And that's why we're seeing a big decline in our bat populations that live in caves or hibernate in caves. Our bat populations that do not utilize caves don't have to worry about white nose syndrome. The ones that stay in trees to roost, they're doing just fine. It's our eastern pipistrelle or the tricolored bat, our gray bats, our little brown bats, anything that actively uses those caves are the ones that we're seeing declines in. And that's why all caves here at Ozark National Scenic Riverways, besides this one, is closed to the public. We want to make sure that our bats are doing okay. So if you ever see a gate on a cave, it's to make sure that white nose is not brought into it, our bats stay healthy, and we do that by making sure people don't go in. That fungus spreads by microscopic spores, too small for eyes to see, but simply by going into an affected cave like we are now, you pick up those spores and can then transport it to a new cave if you don't clean off your gear. So today when we leave, we'll go back to that green mat. I will actually spray down your shoes. That's a chemical called woolite, same thing that also goes on clothes, if you use woolite for your own clothing. And it's going to kill that fungus to make sure you do not spread it to a new cave if you do continue to explore. Now, any questions about that fun stuff before I keep going? Yes, Miss Addie.
Has anyone ever touched this poop before?
People have touched this poop before. And not this pile in particular, but a lot of people have touched poop in some way or another, which sounds really odd to say. But the main reason that people touched guano, especially in the 1800s, is because in about 1870, 1860, people realized that guano could be used to make gunpowder. And that's when we started to see an increase in all of our threatened and endangered species acts in the United States because the Civil War was going on, and this became a major resource for people to save their lives as well. Not mainly because we wanted to save the animal, but because we wanted to save the poop that it actually produced. So it is protected poo as well, which is very interesting. Good question, Miss Addie. We will not take any of that with us today because we do not need that gunpowder.
Is it a different color when it's first on the ground?
So when it's fresh, it's still the same color. Usually it looks almost like a little pellet. We will see some of those little pellets later on as you keep looking around. You'll know some outside as well. But it will have more fungus, more insects coming to it just to gather those nutrients rather than being strictly a dark pile. Usually a lot of white fungus is attracted to that one or grows off of it. All right, let's look.